In this tutorial, we will go over the system of heat scale and how it affects the heat generation of your weapons. Heat scale is a system that was added to the game to prevent or punish mechs that fire large quantities of the same weapon at the same time. It functions by giving an allowable limit of similar weapons that can be fired simultaneously. If you fire more than that limit, some amount of extra heat is generated as a penalty. Note that this only occurs within certain very specific groups of weapons. For example, all the large laser type weapons are grouped. Regular large laser, ER large laser, and large pulse all count towards the limit for that group. Firing any other weapon will count towards its own group and won't affect the limits or penalties that are on other groups. You will get a warning in the mech lab whenever you equip enough weapons of one group to pass that limit. Click the warning in order to see what weapons are causing it to appear and the number of weapons that group is limited to. Even if you choose to equip a combination of weapons that is past the limit for the heat scale, we can avoid the heat penalties by having good fire control in the game. Heat scale only checks based on the last 0.5 seconds. That means you can fire your weapons slightly offset from each other and avoid the penalty. You can do this by using the chain fire mechanic or by manually controlling your weapons using multiple weapon groups. For example, we have the quad ER-PPC Warhawk. As we can see in the mech lab, there is a warning that firing more than 2 PPC type weapons will cause extra heat. In the game, we can see the effects of heat scale when I alpha strike all of my weapons. Normally, the 4 ER-PPCs would make a total of 60 heat, 15 each. However, because of the heat scale penalty, there is an additional 50.4 heat created, causing us to overheat on a single shot. To avoid this, we can switch our weapons to chain fire by pressing the backspace key, which is the default chain fire toggle key. Now when we fire our weapons, it automatically spaces the shots by 0.5 seconds to avoid any possible heat scale. Alternatively, we can split our 4 PPCs into 2 different weapon groups. For example, one for the left arm and one for the right arm. Now, firing them separately and taking care to space the 2 weapon groups by at least 0.5 seconds, we can manually avoid the heat penalties. Using either of these methods, we now only have the base amount of heat generated, and we can fire our weapons without shutting down. These firing control methods can be applied for any weapons that will cause heat scale penalties. We can also avoid any heat scale from within the mech lab. If we replace 2 of our ER-PPCs with large pulse lasers, we are spreading the weapons out over 2 separate heat penalty groups. 2 falling into the large laser group and 2 falling into the PPC group. This allows us to fire the 4 weapons at once, without any heat scale penalties triggering. It is useful to experiment to find the weapon combinations that allow you to avoid heat scale penalties, while also maintaining your damage. Finally, there are some combinations where we can effectively ignore heat scaling, because the penalty is so low. For example, firing a 4th SRM6 over the limit of 3 will only increase your heat by an additional 1.2. You can find all of the heat scale specifics, including what weapons are grouped together, the exact heat penalties for firing more than the limit, and what those various limits are for the different groups, by visiting Smurfynet and looking at the weapons heat scale section. Thank you for watching this tutorial. Good hunting.